Welcome back to Conversations in Eating Recovery. I'm Alison Ross, founder and clinical director of NDH Therapy, here with two great therapists from the team, Sydney Hafer and Lindsay Hall. All of us recovered from an eating disorder, and now we specialize in treating them. This is our second episode, and today we're going to talk about how our eating disorders took root and explore how they manifested and changed over time. While each of our experiences look different, we all agree on one thing. At first, our eating disorder behavior felt like a help to us, but it ended up being more of like a deal with the devil. When we started down the path of an eating disorder, we didn't feel like we were making a sinister bargain. It felt like a solution, a way to escape the challenges of fitting in, developing confidence, coping with stress at home, or surviving trauma. The emotions and challenges we faced were so overwhelming that we turned to dieting, exercise, and food as a way to cope. These behaviors promised relief, maybe a sense of control, even hope. But like any deal with the devil, the price was like hidden in the fine print. What seemed like control was an illusion, and a fleeting one at that. Before long, the eating disorder took control of us. It demanded more and more, leaving us depleted and trapped in a cycle of shame, self doubt, and isolation. It distorted how we saw our bodies, stole our peace, left us malnourished, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, kept us from being present in our lives, facing hard things, and doing the work of developing and reclaiming power. Our hope is that by sharing honestly, you can better understand a loved one who struggles or even see a part of your own experience in ours and feel encouraged to take further steps toward recovery if you or someone you love needs support. So, if you've ever felt like your relationship with food or your body's taking over your life, or if you've wondered whether your struggles like count as an eating disorder, this episode is for you. We want to break down the faces of eating disorders, share our cautionary tales, and show you that recovery is possible. So, as you listen, we invite you to reflect. Do any of our experiences resonate with you? If they do, you're not alone. Help is available and recovery is possible with support. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so Sydney, Lindsay, who wants to start telling us a little bit about how your eating disorder started, how it manifested, and how it kind of might have shifted over time?
I was a very, very, very anxious kiddo from as early as I can remember. And I think I was someone that my eating disorder started as what in my mind felt like a very harmless diet because I had this belief that if I cut certain foods out and manipulated my body and my weight a little bit, that like magically all of the anxiety I was having in my life was going to disappear, especially relationally. I had this belief that if I changed my body, friends would stay around, I would be loved, I would be accepted, I would be cared for. And then I think based on just kind of like my mental health profile and my temperament, it was like a switch flipped in my brain as soon as I started doing that. And you gave me an inch, and I took it a mile and developed like a full blown eating disorder. Something that I really resonated with that Allison was talking about at the beginning was kind of eating disorders like adapting and changing over time. What started out as kind of like my little harmless diet to make me feel better about myself then turned into me learning how to use my behaviors in a means to like lessen my anxiety and make my brain a little bit quieter and like kind of create this numbness that felt a lot better to deal with than anxiety and panic attacks and feeling on edge 24/7. But then I found that numbness very much turned into like deep aching depression for me. And if I was able to engage in a different set of behaviors, I was able to make the depression feel a little bit less heavy. And I was able to elicit more positive feelings that didn't last for very long. They were very temporary, but it made that kind of like numbness go away for a little bit, which felt a lot better. It's very interesting if I look back over the decade that I struggled with my eating disorder. The way that it looked at the beginning and the way that it looked at the end were very, very different, which was during the struggle was something that I had a lot of shame about. And like, I very vividly remember different times I went to treatment, my treatment plan looking vastly different from each other. And I had a really hard time understanding. And I felt like I was doing something wrong or that like my eating disorder, I wasn't sick enough or this, that, and the other. And I think now knowing that it was shifting and adapting in a means of I thought I was taking care of myself and I like thought that I was managing what was going on in the way that felt most effective.
Mhm. Yeah, because one of the things that you were talking about there is that when your eating disorder started, you were having feelings that were like very overwhelming to you. You didn't know to like talk about them or deal with them. You were trying just to not have to feel them. And it's
Mhm.
kind of like a deal with the devil that you were making, where you were sort of like, I will restrict my food, I will go on a diet. And maybe that will make me look better and make me not have to feel. I know something you say, Sydney, a lot is that an eating disorder works until it doesn't,
Mhm.
right? So you're starting out and it's working for you. It's helping you stay numb. It's helping you have this hope that you're going to look or make yourself a certain way. But then over time, those emotions that you were stamping out are starting to take control of you. And now what you have is like full blown depression,
Mhm.
right? Something like way more intense because those feelings don't just go away just because you didn't feel them. They sort of stay in there and create an energy.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you kind of said exactly what I normally say is that like eating disorders work until they don't.
Mm.
And I think at the beginning, it felt like I had under control my behaviors and it felt like there were a lot of benefits to engaging in them. But at least in my experience, what kind of happened to me was the longer that I used behaviors, the more I needed to engage in them to receive the same benefit.
Mhm.
And eventually, there were far more consequences for engaging in behaviors than benefit I was receiving. At first, yeah, it did a good job of making my anxiety quieter and turning my brain off a little bit. But then with that were huge consequences. I had debilitating depression. I wasn't able to function with my friends and family. I wasn't able to go to school. I had to get pulled out of my life to go to treatment several times. And
Wow.
it got to a point where it wasn't effective for me anymore because I was not able to be a human in any sense of the word that had a meaningful life that I was excited about.
What gave you control in the beginning took control from you completely.
Yeah.
Like, just ripped your life apart, really, to
Yeah.
have to go into treatment several times and
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's crazy. I relate a lot to this. My behaviors developed 17, like towards the end of graduating high school. And I didn't know back then that disordered eating behaviors can change over time. So mine kind of stayed on the restricting side. And then when I was in my early mid 20s, we started dabbling in substance use a little bit to maintain the behavior. I resonate with that idea of it works until it doesn't. And the thing that was working for you at one point became destructive in life. And when I was ready to admit that there was a problem was when my life started to become unmanageable. I was living on my own, but I could barely function at work. I had a lot of consequences, whether it was like related to being able to work and be on my feet or if it was being able to maintain college classes. Lost a lot of friendships, was lying, was like trying to protect the eating disorder at all cost.
Why
And
do you think you started restricting?
it came out of a trauma, and it was a secret that I held within myself because I experienced a lot of perceived shame, embarrassment, judgment, a lot of anxiety. I felt like there was something wrong with me because I experienced that incident and I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about it. So I kept it in and I tried to come up with a plan that would maintain my safety while also not having to disclose what happened. And so that was like the origins of it. But I think before the behavior started to manifest, I think within my childhood had a lot of relationship to this too. Like my family was very body focused. I remember during my life, I was raised in a family of addiction. So that adds a whole other layer of complexity and nuance and just like the core beliefs that I developed about myself. And similar to what Sydney was saying earlier, it's like if I conform and if I change my body to look a certain way, maybe people will stay, or maybe my family will be healed. But with that ideology, it puts so much emotional weight on me of having to maintain the family system.
It sounds like you had two really big, overwhelming problems that led you toward food restriction. One was you had all this expectation, like in your family and, diet culture, of course, around you, that you were supposed to look a certain way, that you were supposed to be smaller than how you were. And so you're trying to be good. You're trying to follow the rules. You're trying to turn yourself into something that, maybe you feel like kind of can get you that love and that belonging and that acceptance that you're looking for. And then all the way forward to, your late teens, you have a trauma occur that really stresses you out and messes with your sense of safety. And we have stress responses in these moments. And one of them is to try to shut down, try to get invisible, try to get small, kind of like a turtle pulling its head into its shell, right? It sounds like restricting food for you at that time made you feel like you could kind of hide and get a spotlight off of you that was embarrassing to you or hard for you.
Beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah, and it makes me just want to go back and hug your teenage self and be like, don't disappear. Like, we can work through this. There's a solution to every problem. You don't need to hide. Like, you didn't do anything wrong. You're okay. You know what I mean? I want to say that to your younger self, I think. Both of you have your eating disorder started more on the restrictive side. Mine actually started like feeling out of control with food side. I grew up in a family where we had like such an awesome food environment. I mean, we just had everything, like my mom made so many, delicious, nutritious meals. We had all the, cool foods. My house was the one everyone came to because we had like the Twinkies and the Ho-Hos and all the stuff. Like, we had everything, and we had access to it, and it was beautiful and it was lovely and we all enjoyed it together. But I started to have kind of a different relationship with that food when I was about 11 years old. I remember that my first experience of like just really losing control of my eating happened at an all-you-can-eat restaurant, Marie Callender's, where I was like eating with my family. And all of the sudden I started, like, I just couldn't stop going back and getting more food. Like, I couldn't stop eating and I didn't know what was happening to me. And I remember as we drove home, my stomach was in so much pain from eating so much. I like cried all the way home, and I didn't know what was happening to me, but those episodes started to happen more and more. And it's only in retrospect that I recognize that, Sydney, like you said, I was an anxious child. And there was some things in our family dynamic that were very chronically stressful to me. And I didn't have a way to cope with my emotions. What I found is that food could quiet the noise. I was emotionally regulating myself by eating foods, and especially foods that, were like full of sugar and highly processed. I became rather dependent on those foods because they could hit the reward center of my brain so hard that I could feel a lot of soothing when that happened, and maybe I would have just continued going on that way forever. But then I started to become a teenager and I started to go through puberty where you put on weight. My brother was like a year older than me. We were like putting on weight at the same time, but I got kind of singled out. So in our family, how female bodies looked seemed to be more important than how male bodies looked. And female bodies, I think, in my family were supposed to not get bigger. Because, as I'm going through puberty, all of a sudden it's like the spotlight starts to come on me. And I start to, and people start kind of like making fun of my body and calling me names. And my mom, who loves me so dearly, like wants to help me. She does not want this to happen to me. She herself is a dieter. So she introduces me to dieting. She takes me to her diet center. I was probably like 12, 13, something like that. It wasn't Weight Watchers, but it was just like it. And I remember I sat down the first day with the diet counselor and she's like, so how much do you want to weigh? I'm like, oh, I get to choose. I'm going to choose a really good number. So I chose a really good number, what I thought was a really good number, and she was obviously happy with the number. So she like works out my 10 weeks of dieting. So she's like, each week, this is what you're going to eat. This is what you're not going to eat. This is how much you're going to work out. This is how much weight you're going to lose every single week. We're going to weigh in every week. And when you get to the bottom of the 10 weeks, you are going to weigh this much, which equaled, in my mind, perfect body, no more pain, done forever, right? Like, I don't have to think about that anymore. Like, I'll just be okay at that point. So, I started dieting with my mom and restricting my food. And as happens when we start dieting and restricting our food, I lost some weight and people started responding positively. And I started to realize that that was a way to get the response that I wanted in life, to not get teased, right? So I started to get really invested in dieting. But as normal, a lot of eating disorders start with a diet. And my eating disorder certainly worsened with the diet because the more malnourished that I became, and also I had all this anxiety that I had never dealt with. And so it was all just getting bigger. And I didn't know what to do with it. I'd never known what to do with it. So I would like cheat on the diet, which is when I would go in my like out of control phase of my eating disorder and I just couldn't stop eating. And then I would feel really guilty about that. So I'd go back to some more extreme restriction. And then I just was like stuck in a cycle. I would add other things, other kinds of compensatory mechanisms. And, what I was missing out on that entire time was any ability to really like work through the problems in my life directly or to express and connect an emotion. I was just trying to make myself good and trying to make myself not feel. And it worked until it didn't, just like Sydney says. And when it stopped working, what I was left with was I was like a young 20-year-old who was totally isolated and alone. I didn't like myself. I felt like a total failure at my diet. Came to realize later that diets fail us all, but I thought I was failing. I thought I was too hungry. I thought I was ugly. I thought I was terrible. And I just was very, very alone. And I remember that somehow, I started dating somebody at the time, and I really, really cared about this person. But because I didn't really like myself, I think I didn't respect this person for caring about me. And I treated him very badly. And at some point, he rightly said, I'm done. But before he left, he gave me a card for a therapist. And he said, I've been to therapy. It really helped me. You should go to therapy. It will really help you. And I was just like so embarrassed and so angry. Like I thought it was so rude, but he was just really trying to help me. And I did need therapy. So I like held onto the card for a couple of weeks. And I was so heartbroken that I actually called the therapist. And I was like, I'm heartbroken. I need help. And she's like, all right, come on in. So I come on in to talk about my heartbreak. And she's like, and also you have an eating disorder. And I was like, what? I mean, I just thought like, I'm trying to be healthy. I'm trying to be good. I'm following the rules of society. Like, what could possibly be wrong? I mean, yeah, like I don't want to eat in the way that I eat when I feel out of control. Maybe you could help me with that. But the other thing, like that's just being good, it was kind of what I thought. And I learned that it was so much more and that this obsession had really taken me over. And, I'm tired and I'm sick and I'm disconnected and I'm alone. And I had to change. So, in part one of this podcast, we talked a little bit about our eating disorders, how they started, how they manifested over time, and how what felt like a sense of control or a solution when we first kind of started down the road of an eating disorder became something that really took control of our lives. In part two, we're going to talk a little bit about what we actually needed at the time. What were we looking for when we started down the path of an eating disorder that we didn't get, that would have been protective, that would have helped us not go down that path? So who wants to start?
I think what I really needed back then was maybe someone to see how much I was struggling emotionally. Back in that time period of my life, I was very much on my own, starting college. I moved out, really getting the opportunity to develop into a young adult without really having the guidance or the tools that I needed, which is kind of like, all right, here you go, become an adult, work, go to school, learn how to pay bills, all the things. And so all of those different responsibilities took a toll on me emotionally. And I think I just needed someone to be like, I see that you're struggling. Let me help you. But then like when I reflect on that, there was a part of me that wanted to keep my eating disorder because it was so constant in my life. So even though I wanted that emotional support or I wanted that recognition, there was always a part of me too that would quickly push people away because it's like if they could see how much I was hurting, maybe I would have to give up my eating disorder, and I wasn't ready to do it. But then it was like this like internal battle, because it's like I wanted the connection, but I didn't want to feel like the connection would cause me to lose the one thing in my life that was like stagnant and consistent. But I think I wanted like some grace, some support, maybe some understanding, because when people really started to notice the manifestation of the eating disorder, it became this thing that people talked about. And instead of it being a thing that people talked about, I think I needed more like grace and understanding.
Yeah, because when you were telling your story, I was noticing two big things that were going on for you when you started like using restricting of food as a way to cope. You had diet culture in the background, you had it in your family, you had all these expectations that you felt growing up about how your body was supposed to be already. And then also you had this trauma and this situation where you felt the spotlight came on you in a really negative way and you just wanted to hide away. And now I'm hearing also at that time you're transitioning and trying to go from like your home life to adulting,
Yeah.
and so it's like three layers of stress on you. One of the things I was wondering when you were talking is, did you have any resource in your life that was able to say to you, "Ugh, diet culture, like, don't listen, like, it's all ridiculous. These things that they're feeding us, it's stupid. It doesn't apply. It's
It's
people trying to make money on your insecurities." Like, did anybody ever say anything like that to you as you were growing up?
no. The conversation or even the term diet culture wasn't a thing in my life until just like maybe last year, the year before. I think that's such a big thing in terms of the relationship we have with food or our body image. And it's so entrenched in the idea of diet culture, but it's something that we're all so desensitized to
So
that we don't even think about it. And I was in therapy for a really long time at the start of the manifestation of the behaviors and still until now. And diet culture was a term that my therapist never really used. And I think it creates so much nuance when we talk about recovery and when we talk about the different facets and variables that go into reinforcing these eating disorder patterns, because we have a relationship with diet culture that we're so entrenched with. I wish somebody told me, like, this is advertisement, this is not true, this is a facade, this is a mask, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to be accepted or have friendships if you look a certain way or if you look different than your peers. And diet culture is a lie. And I wish somebody had told me that before I went on this very long journey.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sister who's much younger than me, and I was kind of in my recovery as she was kind of, growing up. And she told me many years later, she was like, you know what? I never really worried too much about my body because one of the things you said to me really young is don't listen to that. They're just trying to make money on you. This is not like a real thing. You don't have to be like that. And I was so surprised that, she had heard that and really taken that in. I didn't even remember saying it, but I'm so glad that I did. For me, like pre-recovery, if this GLP-1 craze where big pharma was trying to make a weight loss drug available to pretty much the whole population, even people who will not benefit medically from it or who might even be hurt, I would have grabbed it. I would have done whatever I had to do to get it. But now, when I see them throwing those ads at me constantly, I roll my eyes. And I wish more people did because I know what they're doing. This is just big money. Do it quick before people realize the damage that actually suppressing your hunger could do, especially if there's not a really good benefit you're going to get from that outweighs the really big risks. But a lot of us don't know this. And I feel like this is something that maybe it would have been protective for you to have heard that.
And I think about, I went to Target the other day and noticing this ingredient of the GLP-1, how it's being changed and malleable to pill form, to injection, to gummies I've even seen. You know, like, and I'm very similar where I'm like, I don't necessarily roll my eyes, but I'm like, I'm afraid for those who were in my position 10,
Yeah.
12 years ago.
Yeah, I feel that as well as I roll my eyes. I hope those people will roll their eyes too,
Yeah.
instead of going into another yo-yo dieting cycle, which
Mhm.
is going to happen to so many people. And yo-yo dieting, like it sounds so not a problem, but it can ruin your life.
Mhm.
It can ruin your health. And it did mine for some
Yeah.
time, for sure.
Mine as well. I mean, I kind of talked about at the beginning of this how my eating disorder started as what in my mind was a very harmless diet that I figured I was cutting out a few bad foods and that a little switch flipped in my brain and I was not able to turn it off. And it went from cutting out 3 to 5 items to refusing to eat anything at all. And like that was never my intention from the beginning. That was never something I thought was going to happen. But I had no idea that it kind of like you always say, like deal with the devil.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think you needed when you started going down that road? Because yours was like this innocent, if I remember your story correctly, it's like this innocent diet. Like,
Yeah.
let's just look a
Yeah.
little better, be a little healthier.
I think mine also is kind of what Lindsay said is that I needed support and someone to validate and sit with the fact that I was really, really struggling because it was a diet and it was very, in my mind, harmless. But the thing that kind of led to me even wanting to engage in that in the first place was that I was struggling with my mental health pretty significantly. And I was about 12 years old when I kind of started messing with food. And I remember struggling with this like crippling anxiety and like a little bit of depression. And no one in my family talked about mental health. None of my friends talked about mental health. No one at school talked about mental health. Like there was not an avenue in my life where anyone was talking about struggling if they were. And I remember thinking that I was crazy. I was why am I having these thoughts? Why do I feel this way? I need this to go away. And I have a very distinct memory that I've had very candid conversations with my parents with now that I've gotten a little bit older of like I went to my parents and I was like I think something's wrong and like I don't really understand it and they were like oh you're just about to be a teenager like it's just it like don't worry about it it'll kind of go away and found that messing with food did alleviate some of those anxiety and depression symptoms that I was experiencing. And looking back, if I would have had someone who would have helped me get in touch with a therapist, sit and talk with me about my emotions, help me realize that nothing is wrong with me because I was struggling with anxiety and depression. But like I was so young and I didn't have a frame of context where I understood anything about mental health. I don't remember anyone talking about anything related to mental health when I was that age. So I had this like really deep-rooted belief that like I was losing it. Like I thought something was so horribly wrong with me. And when I found something that kind of could turn it off, it was magical because I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone about it.
Mhm. Magical until it wasn't.
Exactly.
Go
And
ahead.
that's what was so frustrating about it. I probably could have now looking back had I like advocated for it and approached it a little bit differently, but kind of like Lindsay said, once I got in the trenches of my eating disorder, I didn't want anyone to take it away from me or to help me with it, but I was not given support and help to like deal with the emotions and the depression and the anxiety until I was being put in treatment against my will. Like that was my first introduction into therapy at the age of 18. And like at that point, I was like entrenched in my eating disorder. And I was of the opinion that like I didn't want to give it up, even though it did have such significant consequences.
And I'm kind of imagining right now parents out there because I'm a parent and my kids are older and and I'm a therapist and I specialize in emotion, right? But I still found it difficult as a parent sometimes to know what my kids were feeling, because, there's a certain amount of respect that you give to people, that they don't want you always like trying to dig in there. And as you have teenagers, they kind of push you away a little bit more. And having these conversations can be hard, even for somebody who is a professional, and I'm with them, I'm a mother, so it's a little bit different, But I guess what I was wondering is, what kind of question or invitation do you think you would have been open to from a parent at that time, if any?
It's so hard to know because I remember about a year or two later with like different circumstances, my parents did put me in therapy for like other challenges I was trying to navigate, and I was so pissed off at them. And I used to sit in this therapist office and like would not say a single word for the entire session. So after a few sessions, my parents were like, "Okay, we're not doing this. Like clearly you don't want to engage." So I'm not necessarily sure what I would have been most responsive to. I think in that moment, it would have been really helpful for them to maybe like gather a little bit more information and just kind of like understand what I was trying to communicate a little bit more effectively. I don't remember like the ins and outs of exactly what I had said to them, but like thinking about the way a 12-year-old normally talks, I don't think it probably was like the most clear situation that I probably didn't communicate super well, that I was like feeling anxious and depressed. I probably was like, I'm having big feelings and I don't really know what's happening. Yeah, so I think some like curiosity. I don't
Like
know.
maybe like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Or
And
like, it seems like maybe you're under some pressure. Is there anything going on? Do you
yeah.
think those kinds of questions would have been annoying to you as a 12-year-old, or do you think they would have
Um,
gotten in?
I think they might have gotten in. It's so hard to know. My family growing up, and we talk about this very frequently in my family. Both of my parents kind of came from families where like emotions weren't talked about super vulnerably and outwardly with either of them when they were growing up. And I love my parents. I think my parents did the best that they could. I think like now knowing what we know, I think all of us probably would have approached it differently. It was not something they were super familiar with, of like having a really transparent, vulnerable conversation about emotions among themselves, let alone like with their 12-year-old daughter. So I think just like some like general emotion regulation skills and like a tolerance to talking about emotions a little bit more vulnerably probably would have been helpful. But like that's easy for me to say as a therapist, I think that's a little bit harder in action because I don't necessarily think it's like the norm to sit and talk about your emotions super vulnerably.
But I think curiosity is a
Yeah.
good, like becoming curious, gently curious about what's going on with your child is good. I think being a presence, time spent. I keep thinking of this Taylor Swift song, and I can't, I think it's called The Greatest Day. Forgive me, Taylor Swift fans. I don't remember the name, but it's one of my favorite of her like
The
older
best day.
songs. What's it called?
The best day.
The best day. And it's about how she gets teased at school, and she goes home and she's crying and she's so embarrassed, and her dad, and so upset, and her dad grabs the keys and he takes her into town, and they have ice cream and they have fun and they do all this stuff. And then he brings her back home at the end of the day, and she says, "I don't know what I'm going to do at school tomorrow, but I just had the best day."
Oh,
And I was like, like that's the presence, I think,
yeah.
that helps restore us to safety, and just knowing that even if it's hard to talk, that somebody has our back, and
Mhm.
somebody loves us, and somebody is there for us, I think is such an important thing to convey to a growing teen who's under so many pressures and dealing with so much stuff. One of the things that I think about is how, when we're working with somebody with an eating disorder, what we have underneath the eating disorder is we have a negative core belief. Even if we have some positive core beliefs, we have a negative core belief, oftentimes centered on self and body, which leads to feelings, a lot of shame and anxiety, which leads to thought process, a lot of self-criticism, which leads to behavior, restricting food, using food to soothe, cycles that dysregulate us and get us out of control with food, other things that we use to try to like fix the self or the body that feels wrong. That's oftentimes what's behind an eating disorder. And so when I think about that, I think about how those core beliefs were kind of seeping in for me when I was really young. Like I felt so much responsibility for the stressful thing that was going on in our family, I felt so much responsibility about it, like as though it were my fault or as though I could be in control of it. And that was such a misunderstanding. Like I was just a kid in a family system that I had no real control over. And I think that because I couldn't control it, I felt really bad about me. And I think that was the first negative core belief. Like I'm failing at protecting those I love, or I'm failing at getting love from the ones that I need. And I think that started the negative core belief. I think it went more, that got me kind of using food to soothe. But then, of course, once this new thing came on me, which is like, oh, and also your body's supposed to be a certain way, like you're not supposed to be getting bigger, even though you're going through puberty. When that started to happen, I was like, it was easy for me to feel even more shame. Oh, okay, now it's more things. Like now it's my body, and now it's my eating. And I really wish that somebody would have come to me and been like, none of this is your fault. And I see the pressure you're under, and you're good.
Yeah.
Like you're innocent here. And I'm going to protect you because you need me to. And I'm going to work this problem out that we obviously have. That wasn't going to happen. I was going to have to go through that, just like you guys were going to have to go through what you were going to have to go through. But in my therapy, sometimes we would do some inner child work. And I would imagine that I could go back through time and kind of walk into the room and do that for my inner child. And in a way, I sort of feel like spiritually, I was there for her. And she wasn't totally alone because a lot of magical things happened that helped me get out of that. A lot of really important coincidences in my life and people who helped. And I sort of feel like, well, maybe my, future self was always there. And I think that's a powerful thing for people to be able to do in therapy too, is to like go back and kind of heal the parts that didn't get that healing when they needed it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's been something that's been extremely powerful for me as well, doing some of that inner child work and helping little Sid know that she wasn't going to have to navigate it on her own forever. And I feel very similar in the fact that, like, a lot of, we can call them coincidences, we can call them like little miracle moments, like happened throughout my life that were kind of those guiding posts that helped me connect to support and resources and like helped me eventually recover. But inner child work has been absolutely life-changing for me, and the fact that I learned how to hold space for the version of me that it didn't feel like I could get support anywhere else. And it's one of my favorite things to do with clients now, because I think so often there's like little relational ruptures that happen throughout our lives that going back and getting to show up for that version of ourselves can feel very powerful and very healing.
For sure. What do you think, Lindsay?
I agree. It's interesting because my family system has changed a lot over the last 10 to 12 years. And similar to Sid's experience, I come from a family where we don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about emotions. We actually have really poor conflict resolution too. So everything kind of gets swept under the rug. But what I've noticed is my stepmom and I are in this place now where we can openly talk about the things that I experienced in childhood. And she's able to better acknowledge what her part in it was, which is able to heal the little part of me that felt unprotected as a kid. And so like that's the way that inner child work for me is coming up, is having these really difficult conversations with a parent that we weren't allowed to have at one point, but to get the comfort and the validation now, I think has been really helpful. And for me to be like, I really didn't appreciate you like as a kid throughout these years, and for her to understand where her shortcomings were. And now we can have open dialogue and like understand each other's perspectives a little bit more has been really healing to the core beliefs that I also developed at a really young age. And to sort of like deconstruct that and make a new tree or make new core beliefs. But yeah, like I think we're all going to experience relationship ruptures and we're all going to
Yes.
navigate them differently. And I think it's really important to be able to come to a space and to be able to talk those things out and heal those relationships. And going back to the initial question, what did I need? I wish I had family therapy back then. I wish that was an option.
That you specialize in. No wonder it's so important to you to specialize in family therapy. Is
Yeah.
that it was something you could have used? Good on you and good on you said stepmom, right? Good on
Mhm.
you and good on your stepmom for being able to have that hard conversation. I mean, I hope that our listeners know that it's never too late, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes these things happen early in life and they don't get caught and we get off track, but it's never too late to talk. And talking can be so incredibly healing, even if it's way past time,
Mhm.
and also to talk to ourselves, as we were talking about, to like get in touch with those younger parts of ourselves and to bring to them the encouragement and the support and the love that maybe was missing for whatever reason. I also love how both of you talked about, like both of you were like, I just needed more support. And we talked a little bit, we could talk more in a, future podcast if people want to learn more about it, but like how we get through, to a kid or to a teenager who might be struggling, maybe we could help people who are listening to think more about that, or how we be the kind of presence that they need. And also how we just like shine a light on the manipulative aspects of consumer culture and how, consumer culture is trying to get the hook into our kids from a very, very young age and to get them to want more and to feel less than and to start consuming to solve their problems. And I think that when parents can see that and teachers can see that and coaches can see that, then maybe we don't like join diet
Yeah.
culture and consumer culture in expecting impossible things from the kids in our lives, right? And that's a huge protective factor if we don't join. For the people who are listening, I'd love to hear if any of you relate to any of what we're talking about. If you have questions, if you have comments, please leave them below. And also let us know if there's a topic that you'd like to learn more about and that you'd like us to talk about, because we're planning future podcasts and we'd love to know what you really want to hear about. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for giving your time and for listening. And we look forward to seeing you next time.